Good morning, nerds. It is I. Tabletop RPGs are one of the most free-form forms of gaming or any other entertainment that's out there. You can explore vast worlds of fantastical creatures. You can do whatever you imagine. Or can you? Beyond all the advertising spiel that we tend to give new players, in practice, tabletop RPGs can be a bit more restrictive. There's everything from rules telling you what you can and can't do, to GMs trying to railroad you into their very particular version of how events should happen. So, how much freedom do you have in a tabletop RPG, and how much do you even need? Well, in this video, that's what we'll be diving into. I'll look at what I consider to be the 3 levels of player autonomy, and how important each of them actually is. But before we dive in any further, I do have 3 buttons that I'd love it if you clicked, and those are like, subscribe, and the bell for notifications. So, very quickly, let's run through what I consider the 3 levels of player autonomy in an RPG. Given that our hobby did emerge from wargaming and that I myself am something of a military history nut, I have decided to name these 3 levels strategic, operational, and tactical. Strategic autonomy is all about anything that happens on the level of the campaign. This includes any overarching narrative that the campaign might have. Whether or not overarching narratives being a good thing is beside the point, they do factor into this level. It also includes any long-term goals that the PCs might have as a group. And it also includes the geographic setting of the game, whether it be the Mists of Barovia, 1920s Boston, or Night City in 2045. Moving further in a level, we have operational autonomy. This covers actions and decisions on roughly the session level. It can stretch forward in time a session or two if there's something that takes particularly long time to get through. It covers more immediate goals like explore the dungeon, find out who murdered Mrs. Bailey, or even just finding enough money to make rent. And finally, we have the tactical level. Tactical is kind of a dirty word in the tabletop RPG community. It's often associated with combat, and specifically combat without much roleplay. However, in this situation, I mean this as more of the moment-to-moment decision-making. It covers anything from individual encounters to individual actions. Now that can of course cover things that happen in combat, most obviously what you do on your turn. But it also covers, individual social interactions with NPCs and the angles that you take trying to persuade them. It can cover clearing out the traps in a single room of a dungeon, or finding the clues in a single area in an investigation. All of this stuff, even if it's not combat, does still fall into the tactical umbrella. But these aren't the only 3 levels that we'll be using. There are 3 more that I need to introduce before we get into the meat of this video. And that is what I'm calling the 3 levels of autonomy. The first and most open of the 3 is free reign. The GM just says, do what you want, and the players do what they want. The outcomes of the players' actions are still governed by the rules, things like die rolls, but the actual choice of actions themselves is not inhibited by the GM in any way, and that's the important part. Moving on, we have limitations. This is where the GM lets the players do anything except for a predefined list of banned actions. If you want to break into the manor house, that's fine, but you can't use the front door because it's locked and none of you brought any picks. Or maybe, you can claim this ledge, but no, you can't seduce it. You know who you are in my Pathfinder group, you know what you tried to do, and you know it didn't work. And finally, we have what I'm calling compulsion. And that is where the GM tells you that something either has to be done one particular way or by one of a set of pre-approved methods. The goblins are angry and you don't share a language with them, you have to fight them. Or perhaps you might find that the only way to get through this dungeon is to solve this one puzzle which requires you to follow a very exacting set of steps, and until you do, you are stuffed. I'm not casting any moral judgments on each of these 3 levels of autonomy just yet. That's what the rest of this video is for. But you may be wondering, why does any of this matter? Why can't you just give the players free reign at every possible level? Well, for one thing, the rules might not let you. If you're playing Cyberpunk Red, no matter how kindly you ask the GM, a solo cannot perform an upgrade for their gun. Only a tech can do that. Likewise, when playing D&D 5e, you cannot just put Misty Step on your character sheet arbitrarily and then try to use it when a fight doesn't go the way you wanted it to. Again, to the player who did that, you know who you are, it's fine, I deleted it from your sheet, I only went on to the session normally. The second reason is that trying to cater to all this autonomy, especially as we'll see strategic autonomy, is a lot of work. Trying to prepare for your players to do literally anything that's possible within the laws of physics is a lot of work. And finally, not every group of players wants that much autonomy. Again, we'll see this further down the track. But now we come to the meat of this video. Let's start with strategic autonomy. Does it matter? Honestly, not really. Many RPG campaigns have a very predefined theme. They might be playing through one of Wizards of the Coast or Paizo's or Chaosium's long-term adventure module things, like Curse of Strahd, Rime of the Frost Maiden, Rise of the Rune Lords, Horror on the Orient Express. If you're playing in one of these, you've signed up to play in it, and you'll likely not be playing anything else unless your GM has voluntarily chosen to extensively alter it or to add something else in to spice things up. Likewise, even if you're playing in a purely homebrew campaign, there are usually still limitations of what the campaign is about. There is usually some geographic limitation, hey, we're playing Cyberpunk Red, the only actual location detailed in the setting is Night City, so we're playing in Night City. Or hey, we're playing Call of Cthulhu, we're in the made-up town of Arkham, Massachusetts, we're investigating cosmic horror. If you want to go to cattle farming in Iowa, that's not this campaign. Now, to be fair, every now and then, a campaign will veer completely off the rails and go in a totally unexpected direction. Sometimes a GM will be able to adapt to this, sometimes they won't. It really comes down to how good at improvisation they are, and how much time they have to basically rewrite all their prep. If you do want to make regular, semi-regular strategic changes to your campaign, I honestly recommend Conan 2D20. It's now out of print, but it has over a dozen supplements that cover different styles of play, from being thieves, to pirates, to mercenary captains, to kings. And it does allow you to switch between them fairly seamlessly. So overall, this is probably the one level where limiting or even compelling your players in a particular campaign direction is not only normal, but sometimes recommended. You don't have to do it. Some groups do very well without it, but it is pretty normal, and as long as you don't take it too far, there will not be any issues. Where you may find issues, though, is the operational level. As for whether autonomy here actually matters, yes, no, maybe, sometimes absolutely 100% definitely. This is the one that most depends on your group, and specifically, how proactive your players are. If you have the sort of players that are very assertive, like to take the initiative, like to set a goal and see it through to the conclusion, then you want to give them a lot of operational autonomy. If you ask your players, hey, what do you want to do next session? And they can give you a clear answer, well, now you know what to prep. However, there are some players who, while they are generally very competent role players, are not very good at making the first move, as it were. They prefer to be more reactive and to, be confronted by some situation, post them through a plot hook by the GM, and then take their characters on a journey accordingly. This is fine, but if the players aren't being proactive in the situation, then the GM has to be. This is why you do have to, set an adventure for your players to play through the session. That being said, there are a couple of caveats that need to be made here. First, as a GM, there'll be times when you just don't know what to do for the next session or two. This is fine. This is normal, it happens. Here is what you do. You throw a bunch of crap at your players, and you see what sticks. About halfway into my last campaign, I found myself at a bit of an interesting position. The players had returned to town, and at some point they were going to be heading back out. I knew what they would do once they left, but I didn't have much plan for them in the meantime, and also wanted to start kind of seeding things for whatever came after this long-term adventure. And so what I did is I told the players, hey, you've been invited to a feast by the local lord, and then what I sneakily did was put them all on a bunch of tables, put some NPCs on those tables, and let the players interact with whoever they wanted to, and gauge their interest that way. I'll put the map that I made for this feast up on screen, lights and everything. I had the two PCs with noble backgrounds on the left middle table, the more plebeian PCs on the top left, and the other two tables were taken up purely by NPCs. This being my players, the main things they got up to were nearly being arrested for sedition, and trying and failing to sleep with the female NPCs. The final caveat to give is that even if you as a GM are the one taking the initiative on the operational level, and are by extension limiting or even just compelling their actions here, you have to make sure that the world around them adapts and reacts to their actions. Do not try to force them onto a preordained path. If the PCs like the path they're following, you can theoretically lead them by the nose without issues. As soon as they kick up a fuss, now you have problems. So, if the players do decide that, okay, now we want the initiative, now we want to do something weird, yep, you're gonna have to ride with it, make the best of it that you can, and if what they're doing is really, really dumb, then don't be afraid to serve them the logical consequences of their own actions. Finally, we come to the tactical level. Does tactical autonomy matter? Yes, 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 yes it does. I did say on the operational level that every now and then, if the players like the path they're being led down, you can lead them down it. There is no leading players on the individual moment-to-moment level. If they want to attack, they're going to attack. If they want to do diplomacy, unless there is a very good reason for you to limit their actions, do not limit their actions, and especially do not compel their actions. You might reasonably be able to say, hey, you can't negotiate with the goblins because you don't speak goblin, but if a player has the tongue spell from D&D 5e or some equivalent, well, it doesn't matter, they can speak any language. You may also find yourself in a similar position to where I found myself with that Lord's Feast. One of the NPCs that they interacted with was a dwarven judge, specifically the head judge of the local courthouse and by extension a royal appointee. On an unrelated note, he was a rather vehement critic of the local lord and took the opportunity of the feast to criticize him to his heart's content, as a couple of NPCs kind of nodded and murmured along. Notably, none of them were outright joining in, and that's because, per the rules of the setting, if they were to insult or criticize him under his roof, they could reasonably be charged and convicted with sedition. This one dwarven judge, on the other hand, basically had judicial immunity, and since he could only be removed by the king, who didn't want to remove him, he got to do what he wanted. The players were not royally appointed judges. They were random adventurers, and while they were honoured guests of the Lord, that didn't mean they had the right to badmouth him. One of the players tried to join in with the criticisms, and I kind of pointed out, hey, this guy has a legal exemption that your character doesn't have. You are free to continue insulting the Lord, or to take back your action. If you don't take it back, then your character would know that the most common punishment for sedition is having your tongue ripped out. There are no rules for ripping out tongues in 5th edition D&D, but I'm sure I can make some up if I need to. The players suddenly didn't want to criticize the Lord anymore. This is an important point. I did not tell the players that they were banned from criticizing the Lord. I told them they'd have their characters' tongues ripped out for it. Now, have I banned my players from moment-to-moment decisions? Yes, most commonly I have banned my players from cannibalism, something they still complain about to this day. Likewise, there have been plenty of times when players have asked, hey, can I do this? And I've said, no, that requires an ability that your character doesn't have. And again, they've been a bit annoyed. Almost every time that I've told a player, no, you can't do that, it's either been a rules issue or an acceptable conduct at the table issue. And if you are going to limit your player's tactical autonomy, and that is a big if, those are really the only two reasons that I would say do it. If, say, your setting has strictly defined gender roles or a very hierarchical class system, the players should be able to go against it. They should just, suffer the consequences. If you're an evil enough GM, you'll be able to hand the players as much rope as they want to hang themselves with, without issue. But none of this is any excuse for railroading. But, I might EMS paint eyeball, I hear you say. There are sneaky, clever ways that you can give players choices that aren't actually choices. You could say, pull the quantum ogre trick. If you don't know what this is, it's pretty simple. You tell the players that they can leave town by any number of roads, but no matter which road they pick, an ogre will try to ambush them on that road. It's the same ogre, no matter what. It just happens to coincidentally appear on whichever path they pick. I am personally not a huge fan of this. I've always found it slimy and metagamey. Seth Skorkowski, who is something of an inspiration of this channel and who I do recommend you watch, has a video on quantum ogres, where he goes through what I consider some rather unnecessary leaps of mental gymnastics to try and make quantum ogres work, by having the same quantum ogre appear in materially different encounters for some reason. If you really want to get away with a quantum ogre, here's what I suggest. Make it diegetic. The reason that the ogre ambushes the players wherever they go is because the ogre has been spying on them. It has informants in town, and they are feeding the players' whereabouts to the ogre. This works pretty well. It should also be noted that nobody would use the quantum ogre if it didn't work, and the fact that people use it proves that it does. Much like, say, fudging die rolls. You may not like it, you may even consider it outright unethical, but that won't stop people from doing it. So yes, you can give players a semblance of operational or even strategic autonomy through illusionist methods, things like quantum ogres and plenty of other techniques, but that doesn't mean that you should. The final point that I want to touch on here is that giving players autonomy is not the same as giving them what they want. At its most basic level, the point of playing a tabletop RPG is having fun, both for the GM and for the players. For the GM especially, it's often about making fun, ensuring that all of your players have a great time. It's something that I care about and that many other GMs care about too. That being said, I don't believe that GMs are responsible for their players' moment-to-moment happiness. Sometimes, players will make truly bad choices, And it is your job as GM to show them by means of logical consequence why those choices were bad. Likewise, players can get frustrated at unlucky and unfortunate rolls. As GM, I for one don't believe you're obligated to soften the blow for them. If they roll badly, they roll badly. There'll be plenty more chances for them to roll well. Well, I do always try to make sure that the players have an overall fun session, that they leave with a positive feeling. As I've made very clear, I don't care about moment-to-moment enjoyment. I am more than happy for my players to be sad, angry, and frustrated, as long as those negative emotions don't last too long. And you should be as well. You do need to set boundaries with your players so that they don't use anger or anxiety or sadness or discomfort as a bludgeon with which to railroad you. As some Americanism I can't remember once said, the price of liberty is responsibility, and if players want autonomy in the good times, they need to accept autonomy in the bad times. And it's a wrap. Thank you all so much for watching. Apologies that I didn't get a video out last week. I did have one made, but it had far too many issues for me to easily fix, so I simply chose to scrap it. That being said, if you enjoyed this video, then please like it, share it with your friends, and leave a comment down below. What's the best decision, or even the worst decision, that you've ever made as a player? And what did your GM do in response? If you'd like to see more videos like this one, then please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. It really does help the channel. Now, I started my day with a 3-hour-long naval history podcast because, as noted, I'm a military history nut, and so I will now be ending my day with a second 3-hour naval history podcast because the naval history podcaster in question decided to put out 2 of them in a day. Once more though, thank you all so much for watching, and until I see you next, farewell.